Okay, we're at episode 2 of What is the Imposter Syndrome and Do I Have It? Um, this is a continuation of a series that I'm doing on the imposter syndrome. And in this one, I'm going to show you the behaviors that you may be doing to hide some of your imposter feelings. Now, you don't want to miss this because these behaviors undermine your confidence, destroy your self-esteem, and they keep you like a hamster on a wheel, spinning around and around and going nowhere. So I want you to be able to identify these behaviors when you start doing them. I want you to be able to say, okay, that's an imposter syndrome behavior, and let me snap out of it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, I'm welcome. I'm Constance Howard, executive coach on a mission to help women gain unstoppable confidence and to help them eliminate the imposter syndrome in their life. I am so passionate about this because even though I built a very successful career in TV news, won all kinds of awards, worked all over the country, I had this feeling inside that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't as smart as my colleagues, I wasn't as talented as my colleagues. And even though, again, I was successful, I always feared that at some point, somebody's going to discover that I'm not all that and expose me, right? I never felt like my achievements were because I worked hard and was talented and smart. It was because of luck. And that somebody was going to discover it and expose me for the imposter that I am. And so I'm very passionate about helping women identify the imposter syndrome in their lives and then have the tools that will allow them to eliminate it, fight it, eliminate it, and to build unstoppable confidence. Before we get into this episode, please hit the subscribe button and click the bell so you'll be notified when any new videos are posted. And I appreciate your support as well. Okay, so let's recap part 1. In part 1, I explained to you some of the feelings, which I just did as well, but I explained to you some of the feelings that the imposter syndrome will evoke. Now, remember, it's not a medical condition. It's not a psychological disorder. The term imposter syndrome was coined in the late 1970s by two psychologists, two female psychologists. The imposter syndrome has 3 main characteristics. Number 1, you don't feel as though you're enough. You look around and you think everybody else is smarter, more talented, they have better skills than you do. Right? So you're never feeling inside as though you are enough. Number 2, even though you are successful, highly successful in many cases, even though you have been rewarded and awarded for your work, you feel as though it was because you were lucky, or you were in the right place at the right time, or someone else helped you. You have difficulty internalizing your success. You attribute it to all these outside factors. And the third thing is that because you feel like a phony inside, you fear that other people will discover that you're not what you say you are, and they'll expose you as being a fraud or an imposter. Those are the elements of the imposter syndrome. Not enough, um, only successful because you're lucky, and one day somebody's going to discover it. In part 1, I also talked about the statistics. All of us, men and women, will suffer with it from time to time. Women more than women more than men, minorities often more than the general population, because of the societal messages that say you don't belong in this position or in this company or whatever it is you're doing. You don't belong here. And so you have this nagging feeling that you don't really know what it is, but it won't go away. And so when someone says to you, oh, you may have the imposter syndrome, or you hear about the imposter syndrome, you're not quite sure what it is because, it's not every day that that term is tossed around. But those are the elements of the imposter syndrome. A lot of people who you would say, no, there's no way they have the imposter syndrome, really do suffer with the imposter syndrome at some point. I talked about Michelle Obama. I talked about Tom Hanks in episode 1. So if you haven't seen episode 1, I want to encourage you to go back because that really is the foundation for what we're going to talk about in this episode. Okay, so let's talk about some of the behaviors that the imposter syndrome manifests in your life because you think you're not enough, because you think you're lucky and that's why you're successful, and you're afraid that people are going to find out and expose you. um, you you tend to gravitate toward these behaviors. Some people call them these coping mechanisms, right, to help you handle this nagging feeling inside. And so I'm going to go through these behaviors, and I want you to see if you can spot yourself in any of these behaviors. And you may spot yourself in all of these behaviors at some point or another. Okay, so here we go. And if you have some paper around, piece of paper and a pencil, I want to encourage you to jot down each of these behaviors, and then you can go back and look at this later. And also, I have a brochure that I'm going to put a link in the description. So the brochure is "Do I Have the Imposter Syndrome?" And that will help you as well. Okay, so let's start off with one that I think is very, very, very common, and that is, are you a perfectionist? Are you a perfectionist? Do you um, ha- do you obsess over the smallest detail? Do you go over and over and over a report before you can turn it in? Does everything have to line up perfectly before you can start? Are you stuck in this whole um, idea that everything has to be in a certain order? It has to be perfect before you can proceed to the next level. A lot of us, um, a lot of us call ourselves perfectionists, right? And we wear that as a badge of honor. But in fact, being a perfectionist is not about striving for the absolute best outcome. Being a perfectionist is about striving for the impossible, the unattainable, the unachievable. Too often we think if we're perfect, then it's like a shelter that protects us from judgment, that protects us from being criticized. But really, what being a perfectionist does is it paralyzes you. It keeps you stuck, going around and around, uh, you know, checking, rechecking. It keeps you doubting yourself. There's a great deal of self doubt. Did I do this right? Let me do it again. Is this perfect? Did I dot every I, cross every T? You never trust yourself when you're a perfectionist. Does that sound like you? Do you obsess over every detail? I have several clients that come to me because they either can't get started or they can't finish. They can't get started because they're waiting for everything to line up just right. They never quite start their business because they need more of something. They need more education. They need more certifications. They need more of whatever, right? They're waiting for the right time. They're waiting for their kids to finish college, and then they'll have time to pursue a different career or to pursue a dream. They're waiting for you fill in the blank. You fill in the blank. They're waiting for everything to be perfect. But as you and I know, life isn't like that. Life isn't perfect. And so you're waiting for this imaginary time and you're agonizing over it, whether it's a report that you are going over and over and over and over again and again. You're agonizing over it. You can't seem to make a move. You can't seem to finally start your business or go for your dream. Being a perfectionist keeps you living in a state of constant fear because you're never trusting yourself that this is good enough. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some professions where you have to be spot on. If you're a surgeon, I want a surgeon who's going to be absolutely 100% correct, right? Not talking about those situations. I'm talking about the situations where, you can go for your dream while things are not perfect. You can start to, you know, start the report without having to have everything lined up. For a long time, I was trapped in that whole idea of everything had to be perfect. Like before I could start a report, everything on my desk had to be a certain way. I had to have everything lined up before I could start. And if it wasn't, then that one thing would just nag at me and nag at me. And I would be wasting time. That's simply wasting time. I would be second guessing myself before I turned in the report. I'd agonize over it. You know, I'd go over it again. And when I would decide to turn it in, I'd go over it again. Does that sound like you? That's all because of that feeling that you're not enough, that your success isn't because you work hard, because you're talented, because you're skilled. It's because of an outside factor. You're lucky. And you're so afraid that someone will discover that you're not who you say you are. And so you try to be perfect in every way, even though we all know perfection does not exist. Okay, so let's talk about the another behavior that I know is very prevalent, and that is procrastination. Are you a procrastinator? Do you wait until the very last minute to get started on a project or a report? Are you waiting to start going for a dream or launching your business because you're just afraid? Really, that's what procrastination is. Again, um, all of us have procrastinated from time to time. The procrastination I'm talking about is the kind of delay that jeopardizes the outcome, the successful outcome of a report or a project. That's the procrastination I'm talking about. I had a client once who had been laid off during the pandemic. It was no fault of hers. She was laid off because, as you know, a lot of companies were laying off people at that time, and she got caught up in that. And so she had to work on her resume and, just kind of get her mindset going that she was going to have to now, after being out of the job market for, 20, 30 years, she now had to jump back in the job market and find a new job. So, that created a lot of angst inside of her because she thought, I'm an older worker, who's going to hire me and pay me six figures. That was all the limiting mindsets that she had in her mind, that she was too old and that she wasn't as skilled as everybody else. The day I called her, we were supposed to work on her resume, and she was vacuuming her she was vacuuming her living room carpeting. And I tell this story because it's such a classic example of procrastination. She was vacuuming, and I knew immediately that she was, having a moment, having an imposter syndrome moment. And so I asked her, why she was vacuuming. And she said, well, she had to. She needed to get this done, and she needed to clean some other parts of her house before she could work on her resume. Now, I think if you're listening to the story, you will think immediately, like, this is a no-brainer. The house can wait. The most important thing is to work on your resume so you can get going in your job search. But for her, she was having an imposter moment. She didn't want to face the fact that she had to start this, what she called a daunting task of finding a new job. She didn't want to face that blank piece of paper, so she put it off for as long as she could. And we laughed about it. We walked through, some of the exercises for her to really understand that she was just in a crisis, having a crisis moment, that she was procrastinating because she was afraid. She was afraid of the unknown and all the things that she would have to do in order to get a job. And so she didn't even want to think about it. She just wanted to put it off until the last possible moment. As I said, we laugh about it. But being a procrastinist is no joke because, listen, the downside and the toll it takes on you is enormous. It keeps you in limbo. You're never able to move forward. It's much like being a perfectionist. You're never able to move forward. You're stuck in a time and you're stuck in a doing something that is not moving the needle, not getting you down, not getting you closer to the goal you want to achieve. Procrastination means that the project or whatever it is always hovering above your head because at some point you have to get it done. But for procrastinists, for if you're a procrastinator, you just think, listen, I just want to put it off for as long as I possibly can. Is that you? Does that sound like anything that you do? Do you put off um, do you put off starting a project into the last possible moment, and then when things don't come together, you think, well, you know, yeah, I'm not as good as everybody else. So you almost fulfill the the self-defeating prophecy you have about yourself. You don't think you're good enough, and so when it doesn't come together, well, I didn't think it was going to come together anyway, right? Here's one I think a lot of women suffer with: being a superwoman. You put that blue cape on and you think, I can do everything for everybody else. I can, answer the needs of everybody around me except myself. You're exhausted because you are always the person that people come to get something done. And you gladly take on their work and you try to do your work as well. You don't want to disappoint anybody. You don't want anybody to think you can't do the work, right? Remember, that's the third element of the imposter syndrome. You don't want anybody to think you can't do it. You don't want them to think, okay, she's not what she says she is. And since you already feel as though you're not enough, you try to go over and above what everybody else would do. You're trying to fill in that hole inside of you that says, I'm not enough. And so you end up being a yes person. You end up being the person that picks up all the work that nobody else wants to do because you're superwoman. And the downside of being a superwoman, you're exhausted. Mentally, physically, emotionally, you're exhausted, but you keep going. You operate on fumes. You just keep going. You never stop because you think that's what I have to do in order to fit in. That's what I have to do in order to hide the fact that I'm not enough. You could be a solo actor. These people, much like the superwoman, you want to do everything on your own. Why? Because you're afraid that someone will discover that you're not as smart, not as talented. And so it doesn't matter how much work you have to take on, you do it by yourself. You, even though there are talented people around you, you refuse their help because you're afraid. Because you're afraid and you don't want to invite anybody to scrutinize what you do, how you do it. And so you work, you're all by yourself in your work, and you isolate yourself. And think about that. Think how lonely and exhausting that is to isolate yourself and to carry the burden all by yourself. You may feel as though you have to be the expert in everything. I know a lot of people who feel as though unless I can be the person with all of the answers, I don't want to start it. I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to end up having someone ask a question and me not have an answer, right? I used to suffer with this as well. I would rehearse and rehearse, and I'd make all of my friends ask me all kinds of questions about the topic just so I could prepare myself for anything that could come out of the blue. I wanted to make sure that I, one, had thought about it and had an answer for it. God forbid I didn't have an answer. Oh my gosh, I would beat myself up about it. You know, how could you let this happen? Why didn't you research it? If you were smart, if you were as smart as they were, you would have had the answer, or you would have anticipated that question and had the, research the information before you even went into the meeting. That's what the experts, if you have that, if that's your coping mechanism, if that's the behavior that you fall back on, you endlessly research and prepare for a presentation or something. The thing about being the expert is you never want to get started because you don't feel as though you have enough information. Let me go back to the perfectionist. You always want more education. You want more certifications. You have to be the expert in everything before you can get started. I wanted you to have the description of each of these behaviors because I want you to see yourself in this. Are you a perfectionist? Do you have to have everything line up perfectly before you can proceed, before you can feel as though you could turn in a project? Are you a procrastinist? Are you a procrastinator? Do you feel as though you wait until the very last minute um, before you can start or turn something in? Superwoman. Are you everybody's go-to person because they know you'll do it? Are you a solo actor? You have to work alone. Or are you the expert? You have to have all the answers. Each one of these behaviors exhibits it is a manifestation of the imposter syndrome because it's all about how you feel on the inside, how you view your success, and how you fear what will happen if people think that you're not as successful as you say you are or present yourself of being. Hey, don't go anywhere. Before I wrap up this episode, I want to remind you to hit the subscribe button and click the bell so you'll be notified whenever new videos are posted. Thanks for your support. Now, listen, you can have all of these. You can experience all of these, right? But there's always one that's dominant, one that is the driver of all of your other behaviors. And I have to say that there were times when I was a perfectionist, a procrastinator, a superwoman, a solo actor, or expert. I was all of those people depending on the project, depending on the assignment. The thing about it is, in all of these behaviors, they leave you trapped in that whole feeling that you're not enough. And it's exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally exhausting for you to always have to be the perfect one, always have to, line everything up before you can get started, taking on more work than you can physically and mentally handle is exhausting. You know this. You may be experiencing this now. Being the expert, having that angst in your stomach every time someone asks you a question, and then beating yourself up because you didn't have the answer. Beating yourself up because you couldn't do all the work that you signed yourself up for. Beating yourself up because at some point you had to have help in completing a project or an assignment, right? And so I say this all the time. The first step in making a transformation is identifying what exactly you do so that when you start putting things off. You can say to yourself, I'm having a moment. When someone comes up to you and you're ready to say, yes, I'll take on your work, you can stop yourself and say, no, I can't. I've done episodes on no as a complete sentence. You don't have to explain yourself, right? But you have to be aware that this is your go-to. What is your go-to behavior? Being a perfectionist, being a procrastinator, a solo actor, a superwoman, an expert. What is your go-to behavior? Right? That's what's going to help you eliminate this behavior in your life. When I, discovered that I was just going over and over a project or a report, not because I was trying to make it the best it possibly could be, but trying to make it perfect, I backed off of that. I started to look at what can I do? What are the things in this project that are good and can stand on its own? They're not perfect, they're good, and I can move on. That's the thing. You want to be able to identify what is good and move on to the next thing. You don't want to obsess constantly over and over and over the smallest detail. When I procrastinate, lining everything up on my desk, I had to stop myself and go, this desk doesn't have any effect on whether or not I'm going to achieve my goal. Again, I'm not talking about the extremes. I can't have a messy desk, but I don't need a perfect desk either. I don't have to waste time doing all of the things, right? You know, all of the things you do when you're procrastinating. And it's not, I procrastinate in so many ways. And I had to stop that behavior. An email would come in and I'd think, oh, I have to check that. I was just procrastinating. Only you can identify the procrastinating behaviors that you have, right? They don't help you move the needle. Do you take on more projects? Again, all of these behaviors, you have to be able to identify what you're doing and then also notice what triggers the behavior. What triggers the behavior? Uh, Once you do that, you will find that it will be easier for you to accept that you are enough, that your hard work is what got you your success. You don't need all of these behaviors to have a successful outcome. Now, I'm going to give you in part 3, I'm going to give you a simple tool, a simple but valuable tool that will help you when you are having limiting beliefs, when you are thinking, I'm not enough, when you start to think, oh, wow, my success is only because I was lucky. When you start to think like that, this tool will help you snap out of that mindset and help you realize that your success is because of the work that you do, because of your commitment, because of your dedication, because of your skills, not because of some external factor. Now, remember, I want um, to challenge you to start thinking about your behaviors. Maybe over the next couple of days, monitor your behaviors. Notice what you're doing. Are you exhibiting some of the characteristics of each of these behaviors, whatever behavior it is? What are you doing? What are you doing? And how can you stop yourself? Now, it's not going to be an overnight thing. None of this is an overnight thing because the coping mechanisms, these behaviors, didn't happen overnight. They developed over time. And as you became more and more successful, your mind said, well, I was a perfectionist over this report. I obsessed over this report, and I had a successful end. So I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'll just rinse and repeat. And that's how these behaviors become ingrained because you think, well, it's what made me successful. It's worked this far, so they must, I should continue them. But really, what you have to look at is not whether or not the behaviors worked, it's the toll they took on you physically, mentally, emotionally. These behaviors take a toll. They don't make you successful. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. And you have to get out of that mindset. And what you'll find is once you free yourself of being a superwoman, a solo actor, a perfectionist, a procrastinator, what you'll find is that you will open yourself up to being more successful without the emotional drain. You'll find that you're able to enjoy your success more. You'll recognize who you are and what is passionate, what you're passionate about. So I want you to spend some time and go over these behaviors and identify where you are. And then I want you to come back for episode 3. And I'm going to give you this tool that will help you fight the imposter syndrome and help you eliminate some of the limiting beliefs that trigger the imposter syndrome. And just a reminder, click the bell, hit the button, hit the subscribe button, and click the bell so you'll be notified when any new videos are posted. I thank you for your support, and I'll see you in episode 3.